Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Friday, May 19th, 2023, and today we are going to be talking about Ron DeSantis expected to launch his presidential bid on May 24th, 2023. In about 5 days' time, Ron DeSantis is expected to enter into the extremely contentious and very important 2024 presidential election, coming out of a number of attacks from members of the right wing, namely President Donald Trump, who have gone left and right to ensure that his numbers decrease ahead of this announcement, combined with a Disney scandal on top of many other things that plague a potential DeSantis run for president, yet he continues now to enter into the race as is at a second place point in the Republican primary process. Now, Ron DeSantis had a lot of momentum over the past couple of months. 2 years ago, he was practically a nobody to anybody who was considering a 2024 presidential contender. Right after the 2020 election, Ron DeSantis polled in the low single digits, at some points not even considered as a potential contender. But as the months went on, as things started to get better in the state of Florida for Ron DeSantis, after he won re-election in a year that Republicans fell flat on their face in numerous Senate, gubernatorial, and congressional races, meaning the House of Representatives, Ron DeSantis stayed strong. He won by the largest margin of victory, and Democrats had their worst showing in a governorship election in the state of Florida since 1916. A very long time coming, a very unfortunate result for the Democratic Party, but a very good one for this presidential hopeful. But now, as today starts off, Ron DeSantis is at 19.4% in terms of national polling amongst Republican Party members. This comes as a huge dip compared to where he was before, at different points in time peaking at high amounts compared to Donald Trump and many other contenders that have already entered into the race or are considering entering into the race, such as Mike Pence, Nikki Haley, and the list goes on. As today with Tim Scott, in terms of his declared run for president, or really indicating that they are going to run, we have Tim Scott, Ron DeSantis, and a number of other people, but none are really in this top two race besides the former president, President Donald Trump, and Governor Ron DeSantis of the state of Florida. In many people's eyes, this primary has already narrowed down to two candidates. Even though many others are expected to announce their own presidential bids, many of them are already polling in single digits and probably won't be rising ahead of the upcoming primary race. Now, what I will say, though, is that Donald Trump has made himself a very, very palatable person to the 2024 Republican electorate. There were many ways that I thought that his primary process would go, and in some avenues I thought that Donald Trump might end up losing. But for a while, I was pretty strong in my estimations that Donald Trump would be the 2024 nominee, and that the only person that could stop him was Governor Ron DeSantis. I say this to be fully transparent. I no longer believe that is the case. I no longer believe that Ron DeSantis has a reasonable shot at winning the primary. Though he has a narrow one, it's not nearly as large as I would have estimated or expected given a potential announcement maybe a few months ago. So now with Ron DeSantis expected to launch this presidential bid, I've already shown you the polling numbers, but it's important to note where he was previously and why the timing right now doesn't make sense for Ron DeSantis to enter into the race. Quite frankly, I think he's missed his mark. I think he's come to a point that he does not have the ability to overcome the insurmountable lead that Donald Trump has over him right now. Donald Trump polling at 56.3% of the vote nationally to Ron DeSantis' 19.4%. Donald Trump has an overall spread lead of 37%. 37%, higher than he ever was, even in 2016, after there were only two remaining candidates in the race. You can see, even after everyone had dropped out and all the remaining votes had gone to Donald Trump by the end of the primary process, when Cruz and Kasich dropped out, he was only ahead by 19.5. This 19.5% victory was enough to deteriorate everyone else's campaign, remove everyone else out of the race, and Donald Trump secured the nomination. Not one point in time during the 2016 primary process did Donald Trump lead with a majority of voters on his side. Not a single time did the majority of the Republican Party in 2016 want Donald Trump to be the nominee. It was a plurality every single race, a plurality every single primary, every single delegate victory, because the Republican Party has many systems that are winner-take-all, meant that his 32.5% in South Carolina won him 100% of the delegates. His less than 50% showing in Florida won him 100% of their 99 delegates in the nation's third most populous state. There was a considerable amount of Republican elections that Donald Trump won in 2016 with a simple plurality. Because the vote was so split among 16 other candidates, Donald Trump was able to take that to his advantage and win narrowly in many of these states. But based off delegate count, he won handedly. It's the same thing that we are seeing happening now. 19.5% pushed everyone out of the race. Yet 37% now seems to be inviting more people. I understand the circumstances are different. He's the incumbent. This is not where you should be, or technical incumbent. This is not where you should be as the technical incumbent in the eyes of the Republican Party if he was winning over everybody in extreme levels of support. But obviously, he isn't. But based off the amount of people that are pushing against Trump, it doesn't seem like the majority of the party members are against a Donald Trump re-election bid. In fact, being at 56% means that the majority of the party is already on his side, a hurdle that he could not even cross in 2016 with his astounding victory in that Republican primary. And yet now, he seems to be doing even better. But like I said, I want to see where we were before because it's important to provide context about how Donald Trump went from being in the lead to not because of Ron DeSantis, or always maintained the lead, but being in the lead in a deafening margin, now to a point where, okay, not so much, but now it's starting to return to that. When the polls first started, around July 2022, Donald Trump maintained a lead of about 34%, about 3 points less than where he is right now. And you see that over time, Ron DeSantis started to increase. There were periods of time where there weren't as many polls. That's what explains a lot of these straight lines on the polling graph. But for a while, Donald Trump started to dip. You see, he started off with 53% support, less than he has today. And for a while, my analysis was that as the former president, someone who has a very strong following, as people left the camp, they probably weren't going to return. You see, looking at where his numbers went, he went down to 47%. He went down to 44%. And at his low point, Donald Trump was at just 43%. Now, keep in mind that his polls against everybody else, no one else had entered into the race besides Nikki Haley. At this point in time, the polling numbers were really just Donald Trump versus some candidates. And that seemed to prove that there was a significant amount of people wanting to vote against Donald Trump. He was at 43% as one of the only candidates in the race. Ron DeSantis, who had not even announced yet, was at 31%. In fact, the difference between Ron DeSantis and Donald Trump was just 12.8%. It was around this time that the analysis of many people in Washington on the Republican and Democratic side was that if Ron DeSantis wants to win the nomination, he needs to ride this rise in polling. He needs to ride this raise in his numbers, his approval and his recognition, and whatever it might be. Republican voters are jumping ship from Trump, and they're looking to DeSantis for a presidential bid. When Donald Trump found out about this, when he caught wind that, hey, in head-to-head matchup polling, he was losing to Ron DeSantis in some polls, winning in others, but too close for comfort. In the national everything, Donald Trump was at just 43%, and yet the combined vote against him was 57%, and Ron DeSantis was nearly within 10 points, striking distance of overcoming him. Donald Trump went on full offense. And since Ron DeSantis wasn't running for president, he couldn't go back and defend himself, couldn't go back and push against President Trump. So these attacks without a presidential bid from DeSantis resulted in weeks after weeks of beratement and attack and criticism from the former president, enough that those voters that peeled off to DeSantis are now right back where they were before. Notably, none of the other candidates had considerable changes because many of them were already in the low single digits. The only one where you see a real change and a reflection, sort of like a mirror here, is Ron DeSantis and Donald Trump, as if nearly all of those former DeSantis voters went back to the former president. So now it's clear as day that Donald Trump is leading Ron DeSantis 3 times the amount he did back at the beginning of April. April till now, 2 months' time, a 3 times amount advantage for Donald Trump, to a point where now Ron DeSantis is lower than 20%. He was at 1 in 3 voters. Now he's at less than 1 in 5. It's an embarrassing point to start your campaign because he had a much better point. And Ron DeSantis makes a lot of valid points. When it comes down to the issue of electability, Ron DeSantis is the best candidate between Donald Trump and himself to beat Joe Biden. You can see this in national polling numbers too as well. This is the Republican primary numbers, but with the 2024 races, let's take a look at the comparison here. Besides some national polls where you see Donald Trump and DeSantis about even against Joe Biden, when it comes down to individual statewide polls, let's take the state of Georgia and Arizona, for example, done by Public Opinion Strategies, where it shows that Joe Biden defeats Donald Trump by about 2 points in Arizona and by about 1 point in Georgia, whereas Ron DeSantis in Arizona wins by 4 and in Georgia wins by 3. But it's a common trope that you see really expressed across a number of these statewide polls as well. Let's see if we can find any other ones. You see, in Colorado and Virginia, Joe Biden is tied with Ron DeSantis in Virginia, but beats Donald Trump by 7. In Colorado, Joe Biden beats Donald Trump by 10, but only DeSantis by 3. In New Mexico, Donald Trump loses to Joe Biden by 11 points, but in New Mexico, Biden beats DeSantis by just 2. You're starting to see a 7-point drop-off in Virginia, in Colorado, in a 9-point drop-off in New Mexico, in Minnesota, a 6-point drop-off. I mean, what you are finding is that, hold on a second, Ron DeSantis isn't exactly this super strong, Donald Trump isn't exactly the super strong candidate, but Ron DeSantis surprisingly is. But his biggest hurdle probably won't be the general election, should he end up getting that far, but rather the Republican primary. Because voters are so set on this idea that Donald Trump will be the nominee, they are starting to abandon Ron DeSantis. It isn't just that, though. Many of them are no longer enthralled by this governor of Florida, who in many people's eyes stood as the governor of the state that was anti-COVID restriction, anti-woke, whatever it might be. And it's not just Republican Party voters that are abandoning Ron DeSantis. It's also major corporations such as Disney that are now pulling developments in the state of Florida. In July 2021, they announced they were going to be putting a $1 billion development in the state of Florida, moving 2,000 jobs from Southern California and relocating them about 30 minutes away from the Orlando Disney World Resort. They were going to build this new complex. They were going to work on marketing. They were going to work on this brand new campus from SoCal to mid-Florida. But you know what happens? With all this discussion around Ron DeSantis, this pushback that Disney now has against the governor who never had gone against them before, had never railed against them till he had presidential ambitions, and now he's starting to see the direct repercussions of it. Disney is a powerful corporation. They have now proven that what is said by the governor of Florida has significant economic repercussions. And of the voters who care the most about the economy, you have Republican voters. The one thing that Donald Trump can say definitively over Ron DeSantis is that even with all of his rhetoric, even with all of his attacks on the press, attacks on many companies, he has never damaged a statewide economy this much, and has never made it so. A major corporation crucial to the success of their home state being Florida, as Donald Trump's and Ron DeSantis. It's the one thing that Ron DeSantis is going to see follow him. His dangerous rhetoric, what he has done to Disney and to many other people, the attacks that he has made in an effort to win over Republican primary voters, not only isn't going to pay off in the primary from what it seems so far, but isn't going to make sense economically. Whatever it might be for the state of Florida, it isn't for the greater good. So I'm looking at this and saying, okay, Ron DeSantis is entering into the race, but how concerned should Democrats be? How concerned should they be that he might be the nominee and that he might, in his words, beat Joe Biden? Well, honestly, the answer is they might not need to be as worried as they might think. Ron DeSantis went from being the favorite in some of the eyes of the political betting markets, going back and forth with Donald Trump, to Donald Trump being the presumptuous Republican nominee. You can see here, presumptive. You can see here, too, that comparing 2016 and 2024, you're seeing a lot of similarities. One, in the lead that Donald Trump has, even though it's nearly double what it was in the state nationally in 2016, but also in terms of vote splitting. With Ron DeSantis entering into the race, Tim Scott, Nikki Haley, whoever it might be, all of these people entering into the race. Sure, there is a considerable anti-Trump vote, but it isn't consolidated. And when that vote isn't consolidated, you see a repeat of an election that is set up to win and work for plurality vote winners. Not the majority vote winners, but the plurality vote winners. The fundamental difference between the Republican primary and the Democratic primary is proportionality, and Republicans do not have it in a lot of cases. Enough that it makes a difference, especially early on in the primary contest process. You can see here that for periods of time, Donald Trump was narrowly leading Ted Cruz. 7 points within striking distance, but then he dropped. Those Cruz voters went to Trump. Those Kasich voters went to Trump. And what happened was that because they missed their mark, and to be fair, they were not going to win the primary from the beginning. I stand by that. I think, looking at these numbers, I'm not impressed by the way they performed. But what I will say is that you can see here, definitively, the combined vote between Cruz and Kasich, even though they joined forces, would have beaten Trump. By 10 points, might I add. More than 10 points. 13 points when you add them together. But unfortunately, things don't always work out that way. And it's the same thing happening now. It's the same thing that is the reason why Donald Trump is destined to be the nominee at this point. Ron DeSantis, though he is announcing, probably is going to see a marginal increase in terms of his points, maybe get up 4 or 5 points, but I can't imagine that he's all of a sudden going to turn around a race that was very, very winnable, that at this point seems on track for a solid Donald Trump victory in the 2024 Republican primary. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2024 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.